The Netanyahu Traoré diplomatic standoff, a new chapter in Africa-Israel relations. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and like this video if eerie mysteries and haunted tales are your thing. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is right now. In a surprising diplomatic twist during mid-2025, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu discreetly reached out to Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré, requesting a private meeting amid rising tensions between Israel and several African nations. This outreach came after months of public strain, triggered by Traoré's audacious ultimatum to Israel and other world powers: recognize African sovereignty and cease exploitative practices. Though Netanyahu's gesture, a handwritten note delivered without media attention, was intended to diffuse growing friction, Traoré's silent refusal to respond has echoed across the globe, signaling a potential recalibration in international diplomacy. This report analyzes the broader implications of the standoff, shedding light on how a young African leader's principled defiance is reshaping Israel's engagement with the continent and challenging conventional power dynamics. Historical context: Israel-Africa relations. Israel's relationship with Africa has evolved significantly since the 1950s and 1960s, a period marked by active engagement with newly independent African nations. Israel established embassies and offered technical assistance in sectors like agriculture, infrastructure, and education. However, the 1973 Yom Kippur War and subsequent Arab diplomatic pressure led many African nations to sever ties with Israel in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. By the 1980s, Israel's footprint in Africa had diminished considerably. The 2000s saw a strategic revival of Israel's Africa policy. Under Netanyahu, this shift accelerated, driven by development diplomacy. His visits to Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda in 2016 emphasized Israeli innovations in water technology, agriculture, and security cooperation. Netanyahu even addressed the Economic Community of West African States (ECOWAS), pledging Israeli solutions to Africa's development challenges. Plans for an Africa-Israel summit in Togo were eventually cancelled, but the momentum underscored Israel's renewed interest in the continent. Nonetheless, these efforts have faced setbacks. The 2023 Gaza conflict drew widespread condemnation from African countries, leading to cooling relations. South Africa, the African Union, and nations like Burkina Faso criticized Israeli actions, prompting reassessments of diplomatic and economic engagements. The rise of Ibrahim Traoré, a 37-year-old army captain who took power in a 2022 coup, has emerged as one of Africa's most influential and polarizing figures. His government promotes a refoundation of the nation grounded in economic sovereignty, anti-corruption reforms, and diversification of foreign partnerships. He draws ideological inspiration from Burkina Faso's revolutionary icon, Thomas Sankara. Since assuming leadership, Traoré has pursued an assertive foreign policy. He expelled French military forces in 2023, terminated colonial-era defense agreements, and aligned Burkina Faso with nations like Russia, Iran, Nicaragua, and Cuba. As leader of the Alliance of Sahel States (AES), which includes Mali and Niger, Traoré has become the face of a rising Pan-Africanism that calls for an end to Western dominance in a multipolar world. His boldness resonates deeply with Africa's youth, positioning him as a symbol of sovereignty and defiance against external control. The catalyst: Traoré's ultimatum in July 2025. Traoré addressed the United Nations with a forceful message. He gave Israel and other powers a 72-hour ultimatum: recognize African independence or face consequences. He accused the international community of treating African nations as expendable and warned of a sweeping reassessment of diplomatic and trade relations. His speech specifically called out Israel, citing its past and current role in Africa. Reactions varied. Western governments largely dismissed the speech as posturing, but in Africa, it was seen as a watershed moment. Chad recalled its ambassador to Israel. Guinea froze military cooperation. South Africa publicly endorsed Traoré's position, while Senegal and others began reassessing their bilateral ties. Across the continent, youth-led protests erupted under banners like "No More Silence" and "Africa Doesn't Beg." Israel initially responded with indifference, downplaying Burkina Faso's influence. However, as diplomatic momentum shifted and contracts were frozen, internal concern grew within Netanyahu's administration. Leaked reports revealed emergency meetings and fears of a domino effect across the continent. Netanyahu's outreach, an unprecedented move. The handwritten note-breaking from his characteristic assertive style. Netanyahu reportedly sent Traoré a handwritten message via a French intermediary. The message was terse, just 12 words. "I believe we misunderstood each other. We need to talk." It bypassed formal protocol and avoided media coverage entirely. This unconventional gesture marked a notable shift. After months of dismissing Traoré, Netanyahu's private plea reflected a recognition of the young leader's growing influence. The Israeli Prime Minister appeared increasingly aware that the anti-Israel sentiment sweeping parts of Africa could not be ignored. Traoré, or he acute single quotes as strategic silencer, offered no formal response. In a subsequent national address, he made no mention of Netanyahu or Israel, but cryptically remarked, "When those who ignored our voice now want dialogue, we remember how they treated us in silence." This was widely interpreted as a deliberate snub. His silence became a political statement, a calculated display of strength that reinforced his narrative of African self-determination. By refusing to engage, Traoré elevated his position, showing that Burkina Faso would no longer play by the old rules of diplomacy. From Nairobi to Kinshasa, students and activists rallied in support. In Brazil, India, and across the global south, his speech was translated and widely shared, cementing his status as a leader of a rising global movement. A second attempt undeterred. Netanyahu tried again, this time through Swiss diplomatic channels. The message was similar again. No media announcement, and again, no reply. Inside Israel, the silence was deafening. Analysts close to Netanyahu described a growing sense of diplomatic isolation. Analysis: the evolving balance of power. Netanyahu reached out. 3 factors drove Netanyahu's unusual diplomacy. 1. Continental realignment. Several African nations began reassessing or suspending Israeli ties, echoing Traoré's stance. This threatened Israel's broader strategic goals, including regaining observer status at the African Union. 2. Global backlash over Gaza. Israel's military actions in Gaza had already drawn criticism. Globally, Traoré's speech harnessed this discontent and repackaged it as a call for African resistance to Western-backed oppression. 3. Traoré's symbolic power. Unlike older African leaders, Traoré represented a new archetype: young, defiant, ideologically driven. His charisma and populist messaging gave him disproportionate influence, especially among Africa's under 35 demographic. The diplomacy of silence proved more powerful than any official rejection. By refusing to respond, he kept Israel off balance and maintained the initiative. It mirrored the diplomatic playbook of leaders like Sankara and Nkrumah, who weaponized silence and symbolism to challenge global hierarchies. This refusal also allowed Traoré to project consistency and principle, rather than appearing reactionary. He appeared focused and patient, qualities often lacking in global politics. Global implications. Standoff between Netanyahu and Traoré is emblematic of a shifting world order. In Africa, it has reignited Pan-African solidarity and encouraged a re-examination of external partnerships. The AES is increasingly viewed not just as a security bloc, but as a vehicle for asserting regional independence. Outside Africa, the ripple effects are clear. Latin American leaders have expressed admiration for Traoré's stance. Youth movements in Asia and the Middle East have drawn inspiration from his rhetoric. In the global south, his silence has become a symbol of resistance. For Israel, the fallout could be significant. Beyond the immediate diplomatic losses, its long-term soft power influence in Africa may erode. The UN voting bloc, where African nations carry considerable weight, could also shift, impacting Israel's global standing. Possible scenarios: 1. Dialogue and re-engagement. Should Traoré accept Netanyahu's offer to meet, the two could chart A new path forward. Israel might pledge development aid or reassurances of non-interference. Traoré, in return, could secure investment while retaining his moral high ground. However, any perceived compromise might cost him domestic and regional support. 2. Ongoing standoff. If Traoré continues his silence, momentum may shift further against Israel. More countries could sever or suspend ties. Israel's observer bid at the African Union may be derailed. For Traoré, this would enhance his legacy, but it also carries risks of economic retaliation or geopolitical pushback. 3. Escalation into wider conflict. In a worst-case scenario, covert efforts to undermine Traoré's regime may emerge. Israel might pressure allies to isolate Burkina Faso, while Traoré could deepen alliances with Iran, Russia, or China. While unlikely, this could further polarize regional and international alliances. Recommendations for Israel: engage multilaterally. Work through ECOWAS, the O, and regional blocs to rebuild trust. Focus on equity. Frame development deals around mutual benefit rather than one-sided aid. Rehabilitate global image. Address Gaza,